Hello and welcome to everyone. Today we have another legend of this lovely sport, both fighting and coaching legend. It's Dean Thomas. Dean, can you please say a few sentences about yourself to introduce fans? Go for it.
I don't really know what to say about myself. I don't talk about myself too much, but it's a pleasure and an honor to be here and doing this interview with you. So, looking forward to it, man.
Yeah. Well, to me, one of the greatest coaches in the history of this sport, definitely. Now let's talk a bit on your fighting career. When did you start training MMA? Was it 1995, 1996, or?
Yeah, it was about 1995. It was at the time where like you had to really go out and research and try to find training because like it really didn't exist. So you had to try to get it where you could. So like 1995 is when I started.
Can you please look back at your first MMA fight? How was it back then? It was different back then. Can you please talk about it? You surely remember the first time you stepped inside the octagon.
Yeah, well, I had been fighting in amateur shoot fighting prior to like my first what I would consider what was an MMA fight. But I showed up to fight a guy and he didn't show up. And another guy had an opponent that dropped out. So we ended up fighting each other. This guy was 220 pounds. He was a football player and I was 150 pounds. So we ended up fighting. That was my first MMA fight.
Oh, it was awesome. You know, there were no divisions back then. About your
No, it
fighting.
was no
What?
divisions.
What?
There was no divisions, no.
Yeah, yeah. To me, one of the greatest victories of your career. How did you outwork Serra at UFC 41?
Wow. You know, I had a game plan for that fight, and that was to avoid the takedown and just touch and avoid the takedown. I knew I could execute that, and I did, and I executed that game plan perfectly. Matt didn't like the way I fought him. People might not have liked the way I fought him, but that was part of the game plan. But it was a good fight, and you know, me and Matt still joke about it to this day.
Yeah, I get it. What are your thoughts on Amar Sulev? You fought him. What do you think of him as a fighter? People say he was a real beast.
Yeah, he was. I remember when they asked me to fight him, and I was like, me? Because he was supposed to fight Jeff Munson,
Yes?
who's, you know, a heavyweight. And Jeff, for whatever reason, didn't do it. So then they asked if I would fight him, and I'm thinking, okay, all right. And the weight was 185 pounds, and he had to cut weight to make that. And again, I was 155 pounds, so it was a pretty scary experience. And I remember being in the ring with him, thinking, I hope I don't die. It was a scary experience.
Yeah. Your fight with Jeremy Stevens, well, it's historical for my state, you know, because in my state that was actually the first fight that was aired on TV, you know. That was actually the first fight which was aired on TV. And when I heard Jeremy Stevens, I was like, okay, Jeremy Stevens, Dean Thomas. And as soon as you entered, I was like, I didn't know you back then, but I said to my brother, I bet on Dean Thomas. He said, I bet on Jeremy Stevens. And you won him via that armbar. So, how did you secure a victory against Jeremy Stevens? I mean, first of all, historical moment. And Jeremy Stevens, he has very good submission defense. I mean, he competes in UFC even today.
Yeah, well, you know, I knew at the time it was his first fight in the UFC, and I knew he would make mistakes and he would be a little eager. So I just I set him up. I just bait and trapped him. I just set him up with some bait, and I trapped him, and he fell for it. You know, and I knew he would because it was his first time in the UFC. But he turned out to be a tremendous fighter. You know, the only thing he hasn't done is won a title, but you know, he might end up breaking a record for most UFC fights in the featherweight division. But he's a tremendous fighter, and I'm glad I got the chance to share the cage with him.
Yeah, great. You met so many big names, wonderful names, elite fighters. Do you have the toughest opponent you've ever met? Do you have that name?
Oh, the toughest opponent. Whew. I don't know. Like, so many guys have been really tough when I was fighting them. And, you know, my last fight in the UFC was against Josh Neer. And I remember thinking, I hit him with everything I had. And I remember thinking, God, he's so tough. I can't get rid of this guy. And I was just hitting him and he wouldn't go nowhere. So But I mean, I fought a lot of tough guys that, I think everybody that I fought had something about them that made them tough. But I don't know. But in terms of like overall toughness, Josh Neer might have been the toughest guy.
Literally all the time during your fighting career, you were also a coach. So when did your coaching career started? I mean the beginnings, but real beginnings. When did it start? Which year was that?
But to be honest with you, because I started in 1995. Think about this. I started in 1995. There was no schools, so I had always had to teach people how to fight so that they could train with me. So I always was like at some level been a coach or an instructor, but I didn't turn into a full-time coach until 2016. After I retired, that's when I went full-time. But I had been coaching for 20 years prior to that, just because I always had to teach people how to fight just so that they could train with me.
When I spoke to Coach Lloyd Irvin, he said that the biggest problems were because he was BJJ blue belt. He said it's not that people didn't believe me, but they saw blue belt and that was the problem. And which were the greatest challenges you were facing when you were starting your coaching career?
Um, I didn't have that problem because I didn't start off with the belt system. So I think the hardest part was just having consistent guys to show up to work. Because, again, I didn't have a problem with the belt system because I didn't have a belt system. We were just doing no gi and doing MMA way back then. But I think that, again, having tough enough guys to show up every day was the challenge because nobody really wanted to do it. Nobody knew what it was, and there was no money in it. Like nowadays, there's money in it, so people will show up. But back then, there was no money, so nobody wanted to show up.
When did you join? Which was that year when you joined the ATT to work part-time?
I joined ATT in 2002.
Which were the greatest fighters you've trained while working in ATT?
Well, like I'm here right now with one of them. I'm in Tyrone Woodley's gym right now in St. Louis. So I'd have to say he goes down as probably the top guy.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I know you worked with many great fighters, and can you please describe, according to your thoughts, what does good coaching mindset means?
I think in order to be a good coach, you have to be flexible and you have to be willing to listen. And you have to be, you got to remain a student as well. Like you can't think you know everything, especially in this game because it changes so often. There's always new things coming up or different ways or old things coming back. So you have to be open to all that and you can't think you know everything. You just have to be willing to listen and to adapt to situations. And also when you're working with people, understanding people's personalities is important because not everybody learns the same or retains information the same way. So you have to be very open to different personalities and different learning styles.
How do you motivate fighter? For example, let me give you an example. Between the rounds, UFC fight, and fighter gets back to you. I mean, the buzzer sounded, and fighter gets back to the corner. So he is, for example, emotionally, mentally rocked, I mean psychologically, physically. And what do you do in the first place to motivate him? You have 1 minute. How do you use that 1 minute?
That's tough. But again, it comes down, like a lot of times it comes down to the athlete and having that chemistry with them and knowing them. Hopefully it's not the first time you've ever worked with them, but you should have worked with them at some level in practice to know what resonates with them, to know what you have to say to them. If you don't, then you just have to just be as honest as you possibly can. But I think it's important. The first thing you got to do is you got to calm them down so that they do listen to you, because oftentimes as soon as they get back to the corner, they're so discombobulated and off balance from the adrenaline of the fight that they're not listening anyway. So you got to calm them down and make sure that they're in the right side in the cortex part of their brain, and then you can talk to them rationally, and hopefully they can retain that information.
You took part in many UFC fights, many of them. Can you pinpoint maybe 2, 3, 5 most difficult ones? But from aspect of a coach, you know, as a coach, when you were a coach next to the octagon, maybe pinpoint to 2, 3, 5 the most difficult ones for you mentally.
Probably uh, coaching Antonio Carlos Jr. It can be kind of tough sometimes because he's really talented and he doesn't perform up to his abilities. And, you know, he gets kind of nervous at times. So it is kind of frustrating to watch him fight sometimes if he's not doing well because I know he's capable of more. And then I'd have to say, you know, obviously, you know, Tyron Woodley, his last fight was kind of frustrating. A couple of his fights have been frustrating because he didn't show up. So that's what really kind of gets frustrating.
Yeah, it's hard for a coach, got to say. Can you speak a bit more about an online MMA program?
Oh, mine?
Yes?
Yeah, well, it's not out yet, but it is coming out soon. It should be out within maybe 2 months or so. It's going to be called the MMA Manifesto, in which I give away all my secrets to the people, and I'm going to let everybody know what's up inside here.
Oh, it's awesome, it's awesome. One more question. Why did you depart with ATT? What was the ultimate reason?
It came down to, you know, I'm getting older and I just wanted to do my own thing. You know, I'm an entrepreneur myself, and to be a part of a system sometimes is hard for me. So I want to be able to do my own thing and coach people my own way and just really have a couple of athletes that I work with and just really invest into them as opposed to worrying about a team and getting a paycheck. I know it's very reliable and it's kind of a horrible timing on my part, but I just didn't want to have to be responsible for an entire team without being responsible for an entire team.
Yeah, I understand. Would you like to add something to this interview? Maybe say something we missed. Maybe you would like to mention something. Go for it.
Well, if you haven't seen Dana White Looking for a Fight, please watch that. And it's on YouTube. Watch that and then tweet about it so that we can keep these episodes going. And that's about it.
Thank you so much for this lovely interview, Dean. I will publish it tomorrow, your time, just to make video, and I will publish it tomorrow morning, your time.
I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
You too.
Enjoy. I hope this ends pretty much soon. Have a great day. Goodbye.
Peace.